All right, so today we have 25 minutes with 6 people, so it's going to be rapid fire. We have Kurt Brown from Netflix. Oh. Mark Schreiber from Cloudwick. I didn't write down. Thomas Dinsmore, big data consultant. Nick Ruda of the Enterprise Strategy Group. Mike Franklin, it's a bit complicated. I think it's somewhere between Chicago and UC Berkeley. And Brad Peterson of NASDAQ. All right, so let's jump right in. Kurt, you're the head of data platform team at Netflix. So where do you see Spark fitting into your infrastructure? Specifically, what kinds of problems are you using Spark to solve?
Sure. So we've been using Pig and Hive for quite some time for our ETL processing, and it's always been a semi-happy marriage. Some people like it because it's a little bit simpler. Other people think it's too complicated, depending if you're more a programmer or an analyst. Whereas Spark, with Spark SQL and direct programming flexibility, it's a much better fit for our ETL ecosystem. So we have about 1,000 Spark jobs in production right now. We have tens of thousands of Hive and Pig jobs, and we imagine that balance to keep shifting over time. As far as streaming and machine learning, it's very light use right now. There's a handful of things in production, including our trending now row.
So Mark, where do you see Spark in a typical deployment?
Thanks, Ben. Well, at Cloudwick, we work with a lot of the early adopters, and they're moving now into the early majority. Where we see Spark having a lot of impact is with the business, to be frank. In the early adopters, it was really about the technology, and I assume that a lot of you out here right now, are data engineers, data analysts, and scientists. I think one of the biggest challenges and opportunities for us now is to move into the early majority phase and really propagate the business use cases of how and why you use Spark to achieve business outcomes.
And Thomas, you talk to a lot of people in the industry, so what are the 3 top use cases?
Well, if you look at the survey that was done last summer by Databricks and the company formerly known as TypeSafe, can't recall their current name.
Lightspeed.
Lightspeed, my apologies. Yeah, so in that survey, people were asked what they were using Spark for. The top 3 were number 1, business intelligence, number 2, data warehousing, number 3, recommendation engines. Now, that answer, the BI and the data warehousing answer is consistent with other data in the survey that said that Spark SQL is the most commonly used of all the components, which is really remarkable when you consider that in the original versions of Spark, at that first Spark Summit, there was no Spark SQL. So all that's been added based on input from users and the actual needs of working analysts.
And Nick, you did a recent study about enterprise adoption of Spark. So we've heard ETL, BI. So what are the other things that jumped out of your study?
Yeah, we studied adoption in the industry and saw that about 16% are using Spark today in production, but another 40+% are very interested. A lot of the reasons have been very well covered over the last couple of days, but for me it comes down to choice being a really big part of it. People wanting to choose the programming language, choose the environment, choose the data store, and being able to have that flexibility. I think the second thing that's really come through quite clearly is we're getting away from the tyranny of the hardware infrastructure. By that I mean you can choose, do you want to run on commodity software? Do you want a purpose-built appliance? Do you want to have a cloud environment? And that gives you a lot more flexibility as well. And then I think the third thing that's, again, come through very clear the last couple of days is the ecosystem around it, being able to see how many vendors are competing here. That's great because it drives innovation. It can be a little messy as things move quickly, but I think those 3 factors really stood out in our research.
And so, Mike, Spark, of course, came out of a lab you co-led at UC Berkeley AmpLab. Why do you think it's been so successful? So we've heard across these 4 gentlemen, many different organizations, many different use cases. Was this part of your grand plan?
Yeah, of course it was part of the grand plan. But yeah, it's exciting to hear all the different use cases, you know, for the software and for the things that have grown out of the software. But you know, when we set up the lab, we knew we were going to build a general set of tools for dealing with big data, and we brought in very early a bunch of applications, mostly from around the campus, that would use the system in different ways. So we had an Internet of Things type of application that was doing traffic monitoring and prediction. We had a cancer genomics application. We had an urban planning application, some mobile data applications, and so on. And so, you know, very early on, we got to see all the different parts of the system that would have to build out to enable a variety of use cases. And I think that's one of the reasons why Spark has caught on the way it has, because it works so well across so many different modes of data and applications.
And also, for those of you who don't know, the AmpLab model too is interesting because they have this group of sponsors who give them real regular feedback as to what direction the certain projects should go. Brad, I know you guys transitioned to the cloud. Why was this strategic for your organization?
Sure, thanks. And financial services in general has been really conservative in adopting the cloud for obvious reasons when your money is at stake. We fortunately do not necessarily house, we're not a payments or a bank. So I think we have an advantage, and we were one of the early adopters in being able to look at where the cloud fit into it. We are a technology provider to other exchanges, so they buy our technology, and it's a traditional enterprise software delivery. So we look at the cloud, and you say you can move so much faster, as evidenced by what Databricks is doing, you know, in the cloud. So we looked at it and said, how in financial services can we, and owning and operating some regulatory businesses in addition to the technology businesses, how can we get in there and get experience? And we were able to do that with our revenue management and billing. So that's something that we felt comfortable putting up there, and we saw that we could build the next generation platform. So that really started us going, and then we're looking, and I'd be happy to share about why I think it's important for some of our customers and future products. But let's, you know, keep the cycle going and get comments.
Nick, I know you also did a study about enterprise adoption of cloud. So what did you hear in terms of advantages and disadvantages from enterprises?
It's interesting. We found less than 20% of people today are choosing cloud as their primary platform for big data and analytics, but they say about 40% came back indicating that they were very interested, that was going to be one of the platforms they're considering going forward. When you look at the advantages, we've had a little bit of a reversal here. In the past, people thought cloud was cheaper but less secure. That's actually changed a lot in our surveys. Now people actually view cloud as maybe better at some of the operational requirements than they can be, and I think that shows a little bit of realism for some industries. If you're NASDAQ or Netflix, I'm sure you have huge IT departments that can do this stuff well, but for a lot of businesses, they look at cloud as being more secure, more highly available, easier to deploy and get up and running. So those were some of the pros. On the con side, there's skeptics out there. There's still a group that says cloud may be less secure. They may be less concerned about security, though, than privacy and governance in the cloud. Economics were actually now started to be seen as a downside. Cost of compute power, cost of storage were concerns, and pay-as-you-go didn't necessarily resolve that because they're looking at the total expense, total cost over time. But as cloud continues to mature, as it gets some of the tools we saw from Amazon, Microsoft, Databricks, IBM, as those providers enhance their cloud platforms, we're going to see cloud adoption, I think, continue to accelerate, though, for big data and for analytics in the future.
So we've ended the cheerleading part of this panel. Now we're going to go after Spark. And we'll start with Kurt. So since the brain trust of Spark is here, so you can just let loose, man. What are things that Spark can improve on?
Sure, I'll cheerlead for a second, and then I'll bash a little bit. So for cheerleading, I think there's a solid technical foundation for Spark, which is key, and a strong community. I think those two things, without that, it'd be like, why bother with Spark? I really like the focus on optimization. That's made it really compelling for our ETL developers to say, hey, I want to get out of Pig and I want to get out of Hive and I want to move to Spark. I think the biggest pain point that we're seeing right now is around developer experience. So within Netflix, we still look at it as pioneering when you're using Spark over Pig or Hive. At this point, Pig and Hive just work for us, partly because we have a lot of expertise on it and partly maturity. And getting it to the point where you don't have to fiddle with configurations and figure out your parallelism, and it just sort of tunes things for you. I think that's key, as well as like better debugging messages, not quite so many bug fixes. Like, it's the reality of a maturing product, but until you get over that hump completely, the analysts and the people that don't really want to pioneer, they just want to do their business job, it's going to be harder to get those people on board.
So I'm curious, do you have any contributors to Spark in Netflix?
No, not currently. We have people that have put in a lot of patches and then they've gotten contributed that way, but not direct committers, I should say. So I guess contributors, but not committers.
So same question to you, Mark. So what are the things that Spark can improve on?
You know, I think I'm going to get back to the business side because I think this is where the market really needs to head. One of the biggest challenges that we see is that this is still an early adopter space, just as you were indicating. Now, the area that we see customers and clients asking is just how and why do I use this? And you think about proprietary software, one of the things that it did do was it leveled the playing field. It really made a complete difference in terms of allowing all enterprises to rise with the use of technology. And we're in a build market right now, and this is one of the challenges that IT and analyst in line of business has, is how do I build the use case for using Spark to replace my data warehouse, to replace my BI, ETL, etc. So I think in terms of community, we've done a really good job of spreading the message in terms of the technology value. But I think kind of the next wave and the next opportunity is going to be about collaborating on use cases and propagating those more freely so that one, you know, in terms of the pioneering aspect that was shared here, that's going to accelerate the expansion of Spark, and the success of enterprise is this sharing of the use case and how to get it done.
So Thomas, listening to these two gentlemen, do you think Spark is somewhat overhyped? And if so, are you seeing anything out there that might potentially displace it over the next few years?
Well, that's two questions.
Yeah. You have 2 minutes.
The first one, yeah. The first one's really hard because, first of all, I mean, I wouldn't be here if I thought it was overhyped, and there are some large number of people that are attending this conference that are voting with their feet and saying, we think that Spark is on the upside of the innovation adoption cycle. Certainly, if you look at the numbers of people adopting, number of reported customer successes, the number of contributors to the open source project, the number of contributions, and so forth and so, all of it says that Spark is on the upside. You do also see examples, individual examples of hype, and we'll see more of that as more sort of large, big budget vendors with large marketing budgets, you know, come in and contribute or just try to cash in on the space. And I'm not naming names. It's just, you know, that's sort of inevitable in any technology. And it's not necessarily bad. It generates excitement and makes people look at it. Is it overhyped? Well, that goes to the second question. Is there anything that could replace Spark? Well, I don't know. In 5 years, there may. But as of today, there's nothing out there in the space that offers comparable functionality and capability to Spark. And that is why every single BI analytics, every single commercial vendor is pushing down into Spark, or they're madly developing the capability to push down because they don't want to be left behind that. And that includes SAS, who developed their own proprietary distributed in-memory engine and were more or less forced to integrate with Spark in their latest product. So, am I over time?
Yes. Brad, I know you guys at NASDAQ use Spark for machine learning. Maybe briefly describe it, but also do you have any suggestions for what the Spark community can do to improve machine learning in Spark?
Sure, probably the partnership we can have and the contribution. I mentioned security, so financial services security, and we talked last night with some of a smaller group about needing security enhancement. So I think I won't pile on that one. I think speed is the one that we can help out with. Obviously, today's streaming is not fast in our definition of fast, but I think a lot of business is becoming more real time, and businesses want information piped to them. It isn't the batch world. So I would see that that's an area of really driving hard on making streaming a lot faster. So I think we could partner, and we certainly do that every day. On the exciting piece, the piece I didn't talk about, why the cloud's so important, in addition to that's where the innovation's going and all the software is being built. So if you're not there, you're missing out on a lot of really interesting options. But I think the other one is, it's not obvious, and it's the meeting place. So if you think about, I've got data, you've got data, okay, why don't you go work with my lawyers to move your data into my data center? You just don't get very far, or you're going to get data that's not very valuable. So the cloud is really the neutral zone that you can meet people, you can put the data up there that you're comfortable with, you can obfuscate it in a way that you're comfortable if you don't trust the security. But I think that's the big innovation that is the other accelerant that's going on with the other things we talk about, rocket engines, rocket fuel. The other one, though, is the cloud is the neutral zone. And the last piece is it's not only one. So where the early leader was Amazon, I think what you're seeing is, and that was the point made, that everyone is making available as fast as they can some really interesting tools, and it happens to be around the machine learning movement. So we've seen that Amazon, Microsoft, Google, others are not going to miss out this time. So I think that's advantageous to all of us that get comfortable putting data up in the cloud.
So Mike, let me ask you a database question, since you're a database professor. So a few years back, the academic database community criticized the Hadoop ecosystem as being a step backward. But now we've had Spark SQL, Impala, Drill. Do you have any thoughts on the evolution of SQL or database technologies on top of Hadoop and?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's definitely the case that when Hadoop and Spark started getting popular, there was a reaction from the traditional database community that it's a big step backwards. There's a bunch of things that database systems do, security, query optimization, fancy join algorithms and so on, that just don't exist in those systems yet. But that's the classic definition of a disruptive technology. So the technology starts off doing something really well that the incumbent technology doesn't do, but doesn't do all the things that the incumbents do. And then eventually, as it catches on, it starts acquiring those extra features. So what we're seeing happening, I think a lot of database people would have predicted, is that it's really hard to write MapReduce programs, and it's pretty hard to write Spark programs directly. And so a language like SQL solves a lot of the problems that people want to solve with big data. And so it's a natural way for people to interact with these systems. And so I think what we're seeing is that SQL will be the major way that people work with big data, except for some of the machine learning applications. And so the Spark and systems like that will be the database systems of the future. It's just they're not going to be like the old ones because they're much more open. Traditional database systems would take your data, they'd lock it into a proprietary format, and then you could only get to it through those systems. Now it's an open format, and you get to it through whatever interface you like. And the other thing that these new systems are doing is they're much better integrated with other parts of the ecosystem. So they're integrated well with streaming, they're integrated well with machine learning, and that's something that the traditional database systems can't do. So I think what we've seen is really just the evolution of a disruptive technology.
So let me close by having Kirk weigh in on Spark streaming, because I know you guys aren't using Spark streaming. So do you see a point where Netflix will start considering using Spark streaming on a massive scale?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think that streaming in particular, the whole landscape, there's not a clear winner. I think that Kafka's become the clear winner for data pipelines, and Spark's becoming the clear winner for generalized data processing. For streaming, the verdict is still out. I mean, even with 2.0, it's in the sort of unstable release, I think that they said yesterday. So it's just a question of how well the whole community of Spark rallies behind it, and the opportunity is certainly there, especially as it couples with the rest of Spark, and things like being able to work with event time versus batch time, like those are all movements in the right direction. So we certainly are using it at Netflix. We don't have a winner, but we actually are using SAMSA. We're using a little bit of Spark Streaming. We have a little bit of Flink. We have Mantis, our internal thing. So we're ready for a winner, and that'd be great if it was Spark Streaming.
You have a lot of smart engineers, it seems like. That's all the time we have, so I'd like to thank my panelists.